Good morning, happy Wednesday, and happy Cinco de Mayo to everyone out there. This is Verlita, and I am the host of Everything in Between by Verlita Odom podcast. It's been a week since I last spoke with you all, and I hope everything has been well for everyone. My episode last week, I discussed my time as an institutional parole officer for working for the state of Texas. I did receive a few questions as a result of that podcast. So I wanted to take a few minutes this morning as follow-up to answer those questions. See you after the break. So the first question I had, someone wanted to know the difference between an institutional parole officer and a correctional officer. And there are a couple of differences for sure. One, a correctional officer is an officer who is actually assigned and stationed and works at a specific unit or jail. And their job is to basically maintain the order within the prison. So they are supervising the inmates as they are doing all of their day-to-day tasks, which is, whether it's taking a shower, getting their hair cut, having their meals, whatever it may be. The correctional officers are there to supervise and to maintain order. I know that as far as the educational requirements are concerned for a correctional officer, as long as you have your high school diploma or equivalency, your GED, then you would go through a CO training that you would have to graduate from in order for you to become a correctional officer. Now, for an institutional parole officer or even a district parole officer, the educational requirement is a 4-year college degree. And as I discussed last Wednesday, you may or may not be assigned to one unit. Again, the majority of institutional parole officers are they are charged or tasked with going to do their interviews at different facilities or different jails within an assigned region that they work within. So, and also I know for a district parole officer, they have to undergo a 6-week training. When I was a parole officer, we used to go down south to Beeville, Texas for our training, and the DPOs did the same thing, but their training was 6 weeks. And for an IPO, our training was 3 weeks. I know now that the district parole officers hold their training in Austin, and I'm not exactly sure if the institutional parole officers are still required to do that specific training, because again, it's been many years since I worked as an institutional parole officer. So that is pretty much really quickly the difference between the two. Obviously, the job functions are really completely different, and then also the training and the educational requirements as well. So that was the first question. The second question I had was regarding the actual parole summaries that I mentioned last week. Someone wanted to know what else is on the summary besides the criminal history. And it does address different areas. One, it will ask about the prisoner's education. And that's not just before they came into the institution. They also want to know what has that inmate done since they came into the institution, because obviously, for those of you who don't know, a person is not just sentenced and they just sit there and twiddle their thumbs in prison. And there are educational programs that are available, technical programs that are available for those who are interested. So the parole board, along with the criminal history, they want to know what their education level was prior to getting sentenced and being in prison, but they also want to know what has this inmate done since they came into the prison. And so you have some inmates who basically decide that they're gonna just sit there and let their time you know just roll on by and get out. And then there are some inmates who actually do attempt to better themselves once they get in prison. There have been many inmates that I came across that who had completed their GED while they were in prison, and some started college classes. I'm sure you've probably heard stories of people actually getting college degrees while they're in prison because they do have time to study if that's something that they choose to do. There are also the technical programs that are there that I know the prison system does offer. So there are some inmates who go in and they decide that they're going to turn their lives around, and they start to do these programs, educational and technical, trying to pick up skills in an attempt to better themselves for when they are paroled. And of course, the parole board looks highly upon that because you have someone who has not just settled for the fact that, okay, I'm a convicted felon and I'm just gonna, accept that and do nothing else. There are some people who actually decide that that's not, the way they want to go, and they're able to turn their lives around when they go into prison. So, but again, I've come across those who literally, when you go through their history, they haven't completed one program, they haven't completed any thing educational or technical, and that kind of sends a signal that the person is possibly someone who's not interested in bettering themselves. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First, it's free. Second, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. That's pretty awesome. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other forums. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Those are just a few things that the parole board is interested in knowing, in addition to what have their behaviors been since they've been incarcerated. Has this prisoner been in any fights? Have they picked up any new charges? Because, yes, just because an inmate was arrested for theft of a motor vehicle or burglary, and that person was sentenced and is now serving their time for that crime that they were convicted of, they can go into prison and, end up having a fight, assaulting someone, assaulting a guard, or an inmate. A guard, an inmate, a CO, whoever it may be. They can pick up new charges and be convicted and add to their sentence or receive an additional sentence. So yes, that does happen, and of course that goes on or goes in the parole summary because the board wants to know how has this person behaved since they've been incarcerated. That tells them a lot. It really does. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it definitely gives them an idea possibly of what to even expect if the person is paroled. That's why you really just, need to, as much as possible, get in there, get an education if you don't have one, pick up a trade if you don't have one, or an additional trade even if you did come in with one. You just want to show them that you are bettering yourself somehow in some way while you're incarcerated. And I know obviously it's not always easy to stay out of trouble when you're locked up with people who have committed, much more serious crimes than what maybe another inmate has committed. And there are some people who in their minds know they're never going to get out. So they don't really care, what they do. And yes, people get targeted while they're in prison. So it's not always easy to stay out of trouble. But again, as much as you can show that you are making an effort to try to better yourself in some way, that always looks very good in your parole summary when the board is reading that. So those are the questions that I received as a result of last week's podcast. Just a couple of quick notes. Just wanted to let everyone know that if you have a person, a friend, family member that's currently incarcerated, you can go to Texas Department of Criminal Justice website and do an offender search. It has to be someone who is currently incarcerated in a TDCJ facility. You can do an inmate search, and when you do that search, it should tell you if the person is eligible for parole. It'll give you their date, review date, and then if you go back after a certain time, it will show you if the person what made parole, or it will have a completely different date, which will show you that that person was denied parole. So there is an offender search area on that website that you can go to try to keep track of your family member or friend who's incarcerated. Also, remember that you can call any of the local IPO offices across the state, depending on where the offender is incarcerated, and you can ask to speak with an IPO to ask them more specific questions about that inmate, because again, that is actually a part of their job as well. You will field questions from family, the public, about whether or not an inmate is up for parole, and so IPOs do respond to inmates who have questions about their status, as well as the public regarding some of the details of whether the person is up for parole or not. So that's just a little bit of extra information I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of. If you have any other questions about my podcast from last week, please feel free to leave a voice message, or if you know me personally, you can always inbox me on any of my social media platforms as well. And also my email is made available here on Anchor, where you can email me any questions that you have as well. And I always try to answer those as soon as I can. Thank you. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate your support. Remember that you can always support financially. Anchor does provide a link for you to subscribe and receive weekly alerts when my podcast has published another episode, which will be every Wednesday. You can you can share, and you can also contribute financially, I believe weekly, monthly, whatever suits you best. So, and with your support, I'm always able to level up and improve and to do more episodes. So I ask that you support the podcast in any way that you feel is best. Next week, I'm going to be discussing my time as an investigator and conservatorship worker for the Department of Family and Protective Services. And I think I'm going to entitle it Child Protective Services. They really don't want to take your kids away. Meet me back next Wednesday. Until then, y'all stay grateful, stay blessed, stay safe.